All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join our panel today. I'm Elaine Kwok. I am the Director of Marketing at Peak Power. If you're not familiar with us, Peak Power is a Canadian clean tech company that is driving decarbonization by targeting the dirtiest hours of energy on the grid. Our software transforms buildings, batteries, and electric vehicles into virtual power plants to earn revenue and reduce emissions for building owners while helping balance the electricity supply and demand. We have a fantastic group of guests that will be discussing the future of energy storage in Ontario today. Some of you sent in your questions ahead of time. Thank you. And if you haven't, you can drop them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. And you can also upvote people's questions. We're going to collect the most upvoted questions and answer them in the Q&A portion following the discussion panel. If you have any questions at any point, please drop them in the chat. And before we start, we do have a question for the audience. All right, here we go. I'll just leave that up for a few seconds. Please answer the questions. Hopefully you can see it. All right. (32%), 33%. All right, I think I'm going to end the poll now. Can everyone see the results? All right, fantastic. Risks and opportunities, regulatory and legislative outlook. Great, well, we're going to be talking about everything. That's good to know. Thank you so much. And from here on, I'm going to pass this over to Matt. Our Matt Sachs is the COO of Peak Power. Take it away, Matt.
Yeah, thanks very much, Elaine. Just to confirm, are you able to hear me okay? Got a thumbs up? Perfect, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today to discuss the future of energy storage in Ontario. My name is Matthew Sachs. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and one of the co-founders of Peak Power. We're joined today by three guests who are extremely well-known and well-respected in the energy industry. I'd like to welcome Harneet Pinasur, Ivano Labriciosa, and Terry Young, who hopefully will be joining us shortly, who is having some technical issues logging in. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today. Why don't we start with a brief introductory background from each of you. Harneet, why don't you go first?
Sure, thanks a lot, Matt. And thanks for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion today. As Matt mentioned, I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at the Ontario Energy Board. And I know we have an international crowd, so I wanted to give a little context of who the OEB is. We're an independent public agency that regulates most of the companies delivering natural gas and electricity to Ontario residents and businesses. It's no easy feat. Ontario is one of the largest and most complex energy sectors in North America. The OEB oversees 2 natural gas distributors and over 60 electricity distributors. New last fall, the OEB received provincial government mandates to facilitate innovation, and we're eager to comply, especially with respect to energy storage. Personally, I was really pleased with this new mandate. I left Hydro One to join the OEB last summer, precisely because I wanted to be instrumental in helping the regulator position itself to help lead our industry. We've got 2 main initiatives we're working on related to energy storage. One is our DER connection review, and the other is our framework for energy innovation. The former is a working group that's aiming to identify barriers to the connection of DERs and, where appropriate, to standardize and improve connection process. The latter is a consultation group that includes input from consumer groups, utilities, environmental groups, and DER providers. The goal is to identify options, develop proposals, and prepare recommendations to the OEB on DER usage and DER integration. It's a nimble, forward-thinking group that's been meeting every 2 weeks and is aiming to deliver results by the summer. I'm looking forward to providing more details about both of these and other OEB initiatives in our discussion today. Thanks a lot, Matt. Back to you.
Thanks, Lenny. Ivano, why don't you go next?
Hi, folks. My name is Ivano Labrachosa, and I'm the president and CEO of Oshawa Power Group of Companies. There are 3 companies that we manage and own that sort of have an interest in this space. The bigger group is the distribution utility, Oshawa Power Networks, and Harneet, where Harneet is my regulator. So I see him down at the office when we deal with issues around regulations. And as Harneet described to our international folks, we are a regulated entity. We're the last mile, we're the connection, and we have a monopoly or franchise space. We're one of 60 in the province, and we're about a medium size. Roughly an area that is outside of the Toronto, east of Toronto, 200,000 people, 60,000 customers, gives you a sense for our size. When we look at the other 2 companies, Enerforge, which is our unregulated energy services affiliate, we do work in Southern Ontario. We own renewable generation. We own a ZooShare generation, which is an anaerobic digester feeding renewable power back into the grid. We own windmills. We own solar. We own battery. We have some battery storage type projects. So that part of the company is kind of unique and innovative, and it does work in Southern Ontario. And so it stretches beyond our franchise space, but relies heavily on understanding regulations and the markets and how to play there. And the last company is Durham Broadband. All these types of technologies and innovations and the Internet of Things all are about connectability and exchanging data and getting data back to make intelligent decisions. So we own our own telecom company in the region that basically relies on the fact that we have to bring data back to make decisions. So love to hear all the things on the panel today. I've got 3 great guests, peers alongside of me that I've known for years, and I'm looking forward to their thoughts on how we can move this thing forward as a group of players and stakeholders that are moving and solving problems in the industry and have been for years. So we're all committed.
Thanks, Ivano. Looking forward to getting to those discussions. Terry, glad you're able to join. You manage the technical issues. There's always something with the Zoom meetings. I want you to tell the attendees a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Before I start, a shout out to Jonathan, who actually got me here. So thank you, Jonathan, for doing that. And by way of introduction, I usually like to start by saying I'm Terry Young and you're not, but I'll go a little further than that today. I'm Terry Young, and I'm formerly with the Independent Electricity System Operator. I was there for close to 20 years. I was a vice president responsible for conservation, for innovation, and for managing the ISO's external relationships, the ones with stakeholders, indigenous communities, government, et cetera. I also did a brief stint as interim CEO and president while we were searching for a new CEO. I retired last summer, took a couple weeks off to sleep, and then I started to get back into the electricity sector. I'm a bit of an electricity geek. I love the sector. I love the people. I love the business. And so I've been doing some work. I've been doing some work with a company called Strategy Core as a senior advisor. I've been doing some work with Bruce Power Net Zero. I'm on the board of Energy Storage Canada. I'm also doing some work in the demand response space. And lately, I've started to do some work in the distributed energy resources space. So together with a number of companies, we're forming a bit of a coalition to look at how we can get distributed energy resources implemented in Ontario's system a lot quicker than they're currently slated to do. So really excited to be part of this, a big fan of storage, and look forward to the discussion, Matt.
Thanks so much, Terry. So everyone, as you can see, by intention, we've got people that can speak with great personal experience representing the OEB, the IESO, and utilities. So really covering all the bases in terms of understanding the factors that are going to help us with this clean energy transition. So our topic today, of course, is the future of energy storage in Ontario. And here in Ontario, you really can't discuss energy storage without an understanding of the global adjustment, sometimes we call it the GA, and the Industrial Conservation Initiative, known as the ICI program, which underpins it. energy storage developers in Ontario depend on providing global adjustment reductions to our customers, which provides the primary revenue driver behind energy storage. But we recognize this mechanism was not designed with energy storage in mind. So Terry, I'm going to start with you. Given your background with the IESO, which administers the ICI program, would you mind providing us with a bit of background on the global adjustment and how it works?
So essentially, I guess I'm old enough to remember when it was started, and I think at the time it was created, it was known as the provincial benefit. I think it took people about a nanosecond to recognize that there wasn't a lot of benefit to a lot of folks here. There is certainly a benefit to customers who are participating in the ICI, as you mentioned. But really, the global adjustment is that difference between that price that you see, the hourly Ontario energy price, and whatever contract price is agreed on in terms of supplying that power. It also covers things like conservation, et cetera. But you look on the IESO website and you'll see an hourly price of 2 cents or less, and you'll see a global adjustment of 8 cents or more, even more probably now. And so you can see that that discrepancy, if you will, and how the GA is a challenge, particularly in the storage field, because in the storage community, you're both a consumer as well as a producer. So the rate at which you buy that or consume that power, if you're including GA in that, then there isn't going to be any room to provide it at any sort of increase in revenue, if you will. So this is one of the things that I think that we've got to try to address is, what are some of how do you deal with some of these challenges? ICI is the same. You look at, when ICI was introduced, it was 5 megawatts and over. Customers who had the ability to try to do that peak chasing, if you will. And if you had, there were the five peak hours of the year. If you were able to reduce your consumption, then you had global adjustment offsets in the following 12 years. Now you got a lot more companies eligible to participate and are participating. But at the end of the day, this is a bit of a wealth transfer, right? You're going from, these are all fixed costs that we're dealing with, and you're going from those who are participating in ICI and eligible, Class A, to Class B. And so you've got some challenges. And I think this is, there's been some steps taken by the government in terms of transferring some of these costs over to the tax base. But this is a big challenge in terms of both GA and ICI. And ICI too is one of those things where you've got a lot of assets, I think, in the distribution system that are chasing the peak. And I think those are underutilized assets. And one of the things that we need to look at is how you can get more out of those assets than just simply for peak chasing.
Yeah, this idea of them being underutilized assets is an interesting one. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. The GA mechanism has created a fairly lucrative market in Ontario. It's brought in developers from other regions to Ontario, brought in investment and helped companies like Peak Power. At the same time, it kind of creates some constraints. You mentioned other services that could be provided by these systems that are underutilized, and certainly some customers that we can't really approach. So today we have a situation where the vast majority of energy storage projects in Ontario are financed through GA savings. So Terry, just to kind of bring this to a full thought here, can you comment on the appropriateness of the GA being used to support storage and any limitations or constraints that you see with this approach?
Well, I do think that it's like anything in the electricity sector. You plug one hole and another pops up somewhere, right? It's so interconnected. And I think when you start talking about this, you've got to look at what those impacts are. In 2020, in the summer of 2020, the government put a hiatus, a 1-year hiatus on the global adjustment. And it's challenging because so many companies have invested, as you mentioned, Matt. And so if you take away the incentives associated with ICI, then how are you recovering that investment? And I think this is the challenge, right? It's not, I think that 4 years ago when the provincial government came in, I mean, there was a lot of talk about trying to make changes to the ICI program. if not eliminated entirely. And it's a tough nut to crack. And I think we're seeing that now.
Ivano, I'm going to pass it to you. I know that Enerforge is interested in pursuing energy storage projects. You've mentioned the investments that the Oshawa Power Group of companies has made in renewable energy. Do you have any concerns with financing energy storage systems based off of the global adjustment?
Yeah, I mean, I thank you, Terry. You gave a good history. I mean, you and I, Terry, have been around long enough where we've been chasing policy on conservation and shifting peaks. I mean, I'm reminded for the industry, the power factor demand charges. I also remember the water heater controls in our industry for distribution. So we've been always experimenting and working with policy and programs to try and deal with this issue of more efficiently using our grid. When it comes to Enerforge, our investing side of the company, to get into this space, and we think it's a solid space. There is some squeeze, but one of the attractions is the risk. The risk reward balance isn't quite there. If you're going to make an investment in the technology, and technology, some of it's nascent, some of it's emerging, it's getting better. It's a snapshot in time. You make that investment, and you've got to play that over a period of time. The problem is the security around making sure that the market stabilizes and it's there long enough and predictable enough that you could actually make your return. If there's risk associated with that, there should be more reward. Again, the markets tend to give you risk reward balances. Right now, I wouldn't say it's quite as balanced. You'd have to look at some industries and definitely place a bet on making sure that industry A is going to stick around long enough, B, the load is there and it's not going to fluctuate, and then C, that the rules are in place for a long enough time that you can make your money back or make a reasonable return on that investment. So I'd say right now it's not as balanced.
Yeah, you mentioned this, political risk associated with it. One question that I get asked a lot is what happens if the GA goes away? So, does that thought concern you when you're making capital decisions for Enerforge?
It does. And even clients we advise, I mean, if I put the networks hat on and people who want to invest, I get asked, well, is this GA savings secure enough that the investment would be fine if an individual or an organization was making that investment? So we do get asked quite a bit. As the guy who sends the bill out, I have to collect all the charges for Terry and Harneet and everybody else upstream. I mean, I get asked quite a bit, what do these line items mean and how long are they going to stay? And are they proportionate? And you started with the GA. Most of the commentary is it's disproportionate. It seems to be one side cross-subsidizing the other. But the biggest challenge when people want to make those investments, I spoke as if I was making the investment. We have to take a hard look at the industry. We also get asked, the industry asks, as the networks guy connecting them, going, I'm going to make this investment. What's your thoughts? How long is it going to be? Is it going to be there forever or for a period of time that I could at least bank on it? Because I'm using the GA busting, as that's the term that's used, as the savings that pays for the investment. A lot of it's unknown. There's not a lot of security and stabilization on that. A lot of talk about shifting over time.
And Terry, with your role within the ISO, obviously closely monitoring the changes you mentioned, more and more customers being allowed. Like on the one side, it seems like the ICI program has been growing over the years. If you had to read the tea leaves, do you anticipate any significant changes to the ICI program or the GA mechanism moving forward?
I mean, I think if there are, it's going to be very carefully, Matt. I mean, just for all the reasons we've talked about, right? There has been so much, and I think this is one of the things that I personally found out when that hiatus came 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago, is there were a lot of different opinions around this, and it was a lot based in, and we've done the ISO when I was there did some work on where some of these assets are in the distribution system and how they were installed, and there was a significant amount of investment that's been made. And as we've heard, a lot of that investment is made given what the GA savings are going to do to that customer, right? So this is not something that I think you can wade too quickly in. There's just a lot of challenges and a lot of impacts associated with any change.
Yeah.
Just maybe to
So,
piggyback on Terry's point, Matt. I mean, in Enerforge, we were consulting with a heavy manufacturing industry in Ontario, and that GA security question had come up in terms of they were looking at investments behind the meter. What it did do is what would be competitors in that industry sort of bandied together to go, well, if we aggregated as a group of organizations so that we were able to manage, the impact of the peak of 5 big players, it was kind of a unique scenario. It brings about collaborators and ways to maybe blend out the risk, I guess, if you want to call it that, to go, hey, we can invest in a project, sort of interconnected, almost like a micro community. But because they were large enough, it would be significant on the peak of the system in Ontario. They were playing as a consortium, which is kind of interesting. It brings about a different play, and I like that kind of thought.
yeah, that's certainly an innovative solution to manage risk. So as we start thinking about the future and different policies, Harneet, I'm going to turn it to you. You've joined the OEB at a particularly exciting time. There seem to be so many different grid modernization projects currently underway. You mentioned some in your introductory comments with the DER connection review and the framework for energy innovation. Can you tell us a bit about some of these initiatives and what you're most excited about seeing?
Sure, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so, I mentioned 2 of them in my opening remarks. First one was the framework for energy innovation. We really want to make sure we had a consulted approach on how DERs get integrated in the province and also how DERs can be used. The permutations on how this technology is used, it can solve a whole bunch of problems. Just speaking academically, like this technology in some cases isn't new. It's evolved and it's adapted. The pricing has come down. There's been improvements. And when you look globally, the same technology solves different problems in the context it's used. And so talking about DER usage and DER integration was important. And part of that was to get a consultation and get feedback and input from all the people that are, partaking in DER investments and looking to build DERs in their systems. So that was the first one. The other one is, how do you connect them? The technology has changed and evolved. We want to make sure that all utilities across the province are playing sort of with the same rules so that everyone has the right expectations around timelines. We are looking to amend some of the codes to update some of that and reflect some of that, and that's going to come out in about 2 weeks. It'll also include things around, definitions and timelines. We're doing it in tranches. So we just finished the second tranche. The third tranche will also look at sort of the risk management aspect. Utility planning has shifted on how we plan for DERs being connected. We don't need to necessarily always plan for the peaks. There's other ways that we can manage some of the risk and the right size of risk mitigation and the right cost will also help increase the penetration and increase DERs in Ontario too. So we're looking at that. And then there's other things, forward-looking items like bidirectional EV charging. We're hearing a lot of that, uptake in the US. We just heard big announcements from PG&E with Ford and GM. So, we know there's other things coming. So we're trying to be forward-looking and bring some of those to the table. There's other items like optional enhanced time of use that the provinces asked us to look at to really further enhance demand shifting away from peak periods and lower demand periods. And we're going to look to report back to the ministry April 1st. The last piece I'll mention is around our innovation work associated with our sandbox. For those who don't know, we have a sandbox, and just recently we had a joint call with the IESO that also brought together the Great Innovation Fund. So that was money that was allotted to projects that we're evaluating, and we'll be looking to issue a list of final candidates that were successful. And the sandbox is really there to help explore some of the gray area that might exist, some of the areas where people are looking to push the frontier of what is currently in play with the rules and policies. And where it's appropriate, we'll look to give regulatory exemptions to help push the innovation portfolio. Turn it back to you with that, Matt. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Harneet. And I'm, of course, glad that you mentioned bidirectional electric vehicles. Of course, it's of interest to Peak Power. It's one of the things that we do, but I want to draw it more broadly. While we're talking about energy storage, really we're talking about distributed energy resources more broadly. And that can include, batteries, buildings, vehicles, solar, and wind, perhaps, how all these nodes of energy can participate in a dynamic grid. And, when we talked about the global adjustment, one of the constraints that I always see is that it's kind of framed mainly for Class A customers. And so we want to look for different opportunities for Class B and residential customers to participate. the OEB and the IESO really is doing so much in terms of stakeholder consultations on these groups. It's a sign of how quickly things are moving. I think it's also a sign of an openness on behalf of the IESO and the OEB to solicit feedback. Typically when you think of regulatory policy, there's a stereotype of policy being defined, behind closed doors and smoke-filled rooms. That doesn't seem to be the case these days. Harneet, is this an intentional change in process on behalf of the OEB? Are you seeing this in practice, or is it just, a function of the timing that there happens to be a lot going on right now?
No, it's 100% intentional. I don't think any one of us on this call or even in the audience can solve the issues we're going through with energy transition with a black box closed door approach. We need to be out here talking to you folks and need to be talking to us. We need to work through all these challenges together. I think this is going to be a joint piece. The IESO and us are also really well aligned. We have quarterly meetings with senior management where we talk about a variety of issues and things that we're working on just to make sure that we have alignment on the approaches we're taking. So I think alignment with industry and with the IESO, those are all important aspects on moving together in the changes that we're seeing in the market. We've also enhanced the way we want everyone to engage with us. I'll just quickly plug the fact that we've also updated our website deliberately to be able to be a lot more user-friendly and accessible. We've also launched an OEB Engage with Us, which is a platform for folks to engage on a lot of the large initiatives that we've launched. So I encourage everyone to follow us on that. And the last one is our LinkedIn page. So we do issue a lot of communication out there and we seek to engage with everyone. So if you don't already, make sure you follow us on LinkedIn where we push out a lot of the updates that the OEB's working on.
Yeah, I know that there are a number of utility representatives in the attendees tonight, so I would consider that. I want to speak on your behalf. Sounds like an open invitation. Maybe your inbox might get flooded by tomorrow, but getting that feedback and bringing in the utility perspective, I think, is really important. So,
Matt, can I also maybe direct everyone in instead of my inbox necessarily? We do have something called the IREs, which are Industrial Relations Inquiries, and those are really it's if you go OEB IRE, you'll get a contact there and an email, and the purpose of that is really, where there is regulatory guidance that is required, especially if you're looking to do something that may not be considered traditional and, you got questions on it, you want clarity, reach out to us. Don't do it in isolation. We want to be part of those conversations, especially if you're looking to push the frontier. Reach out to us through our IRE process. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So talking about regulatory and policy, in the U.S., supporters of energy storage are really excited about FERC 2222. It seems to be all we talk about sometimes. This is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and their mandate that's going to force every utility and system operator in the U.S. to adapt their market rules to allow distributed energy resources, such as storage, buildings, vehicles we talked about, to participate in wholesale energy markets. So is Ontario keeping up? And what will it take to allow distributed energy resources to participate in Ontario's ISO-administered markets? I'm going to start with Harneet first, then I'm curious to get Terry's perspective, and Ivano, of course, if you have anything you'd like to add on this topic.
Sure, thanks, Matt. So, uncoupling for 2222, I mean, it's multifaceted. It covers a whole bunch of items. I'd say when you look at some of the policies that we've got, they're not in one document. There's several documents that look to tackle different problems and different issues. One of the things that we learned when we did our top quartile regulator review around regulatory bodies across the world is that you can't just quickly adopt policies and adopt items. You need to adapt them to the context. And so for Ontario, I think we've got some of the pieces moving. There's obviously more that we can continue to look at, and that's why we have some of the consultations we do. One of the things I'd like to highlight for the audience, and I'd recommend they look at, you talked about participation in IESO markets. There are a lot of guidelines, a lot of documents that the OEB has issued. The first one that the one that I would want to highlight is a recent one. So in 2021, we issued our CDM, our Conservation and Demand Management Guidelines. And it's a fairly thick document. It's got a lot of guidance in it. But the one that relates to sort of what you're talking about, and I'll just read that one out verbatim, is it provides options for distributor cost recovery where distributor CDM activities also earn revenues from the IESO markets. So back to Terry's point, right? You invest in assets. It's one thing to solve one problem, but that asset could probably do more than just solve that one problem. And so documents like this clearly lay out that you can solve that problem. You know, you can deal with CDM issues that you've got in your system, but you can also participate in IESO markets. There's a lot of these types of guidances or guidance documents that are out there. Again, we'll look to help provide guidance through our IRE process if there is questions that come up. But there are a lot of documents out there, and I'd encourage you folks to definitely look at our new CDM guideline that we released last year.
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. Terry, I know this is a topic that's pretty dear to your heart.
Yeah, I mean, I would be a little more candid on this and suggest that no, Ontario's not keeping up. And when I look at what's happening in jurisdictions around us, when I look at what's happening in Ontario, and you start to see some of the things that are going on or not going on. So I look at, the ISO and its market renewal project, and I look at the what it's looking at in this first iteration and what its first release and what it's not. And I would put DERs in the what it's not category. And when I look at the 1,000 megawatt long-term RFP that's being discussed, I don't see much room in there for DERs. When you start to think about we have to have the systems, we have to have the rules, we have to have the processes all in place. And this is about being nimble, being quick, responding. Really encouraging to hear Harneet and the new culture that I see at the OEB, and I think Harneet's a great example of that. So congrats on that, and I think we're going to need that. Having moved from the IESO now to a stakeholder, I guess I'm experiencing firsthand many of the discussions I had when I was at the IESO. But I think you look at 2222 and you see the obligations that are on the system operators there. There's no such obligation on the system operator here. And I think we're also why it's so critical to me is that I look over the next 5 years and I see the challenges that are coming. I see the more traditional generation that we have. Some of this is coming out of service, like Pickering. It's 3,000 megawatts that are coming out of service. A lot of challenges, a lot of talk around gas. What's going to happen with gas? The ministers asked for a moratorium to look at the possibility of a moratorium on new gas. There's carbon prices coming in on new gas. So there's a lot of uncertainties, a lot of uncertainty, where it comes to transmission. And yes, I mean, there's some great ideas around, bringing in power from other jurisdictions, but you need the highways to bring it as well. And it's been decades since we built a new transmission line in Ontario. And the beauty of distributed energy resources is you can put them close to the load. So they are there. They don't need the same infrastructure that a big plan at the end of a very long line needs. And so I think there's just a lot, but I think we really have to accelerate the pace to get these in time that they can meet the needs that we know are coming at us.
So Terry, that's a fairly strong statement. So I'm gonna probe a little bit just to put you on the spot. Last November, I believe, the Ministry of Energy issued a mandate letter to the OEB, which signaled support for further innovation of non-wireless alternatives, enhancing time of use rates, which Harneet mentioned. One that I find most interesting, the development of dynamic pricing mechanisms for Class B customers. Again, this potential for a ICI type program, but actually designed for distributed energy resources and for Class B customers and potentially residential as well. So what's missing? What more could be done? It seems like there's a definite intent and awareness that this is on the radar. How is it not hitting the mark in your eyes?
I think it's the progress that's not being made and the timelines associated with some of this, right? I think we're way past the point where these are disruptive technologies, which was the buzzwords we used a decade ago. These are resources that we're going to need. And we need to make sure that, and you know what? I mean, the OEB is doing a great job. The IESO is doing a great job. They both have so much on their plate right now. When you think about the letters that have come down from the government with respect to that, but we are going to need some really quick turnaround. We're going to really need to be able to embrace these new technologies or these new resources that are coming in. And the other thing that I think is worth noting as well, Matt, is that you look around us and other jurisdictions are seeing exactly what we're seeing. And so we're not the only game in town. Ontario is not the only game in town. And so there is going to be a competition for these resources that Ontario is going to be competing with other jurisdictions. And again, it speaks to the pace of implementation. And that's where I think these are all great intentions. I think these are all, everybody has their heart in the right place. I just think we've got to move a lot faster.
So, Ivano, I'd like to circle back to the role of the utility as part of the energy transition. There are criticisms that utilities have a hard time being innovative, which I understand since reliability is the primary concern. And in some regions like New York and California, there are restrictions that limit the utility ownership of energy storage and other distributed energy resources. So what do you feel should be the role of the utility as part of this transition, and when is it appropriate for utilities to be owners of customer-sited distributed energy resources?
I'm listening to all the responses, and you know, your FERC comment around the top-down policy-driven sort of disrupts the utility sector. I mean, I could just imagine if we didn't have COVID and I'd be down south talking to my peers, there's a bunch of people, complaining about it, going, it's creating chaos, no rules. The people who are safeguarders of the grid. So there's one role utilities play. They keep the grid intact, and they're safeguarding the grid to make sure wild players who want to connect everywhere and just invest and connect as an opportunity don't usurp the grid and create problems. The other side see it as opportunities to go, hey, it's a better chance to engage with my customers. And again, we're in the same boat. We've got to safeguard the grid, but I said earlier, we send the bill. We get the feeling about how much it costs and what it is, and maybe it's not valued as much. Well, when people want to explore a connection or a solution, and then we have to go, well, the policy says this or it's rolled out like that. One of the things I get, I guess another role utilities play is the intermediary or the advocate on the consumer, but the intermediary for the consumer and the policymakers. One of the roles is to try to explain the rules of the game, help them understand it. But the other role that we end up playing is again trying to navigate, almost as a consultant, help them think through how this is going to play. One of the problems we get, and it's still out there, is I call it the diffused benefits problem. I remember we were dealing with it, Terry, when we were talking about it at Smart Grid Committee, saying if the end mile is making the investment to benefit the entire pool, the benefits attribute upstream to the generators and the ISO and the transmitters. So Terry talked about avoided transmission line development, right? We haven't built one in a long time. Yeah, well, if I don't get the credit for that avoidance, it's never going to justify the storage at the end. I like some of the work we've done. I think the ISO has done a great job doing the regional plans to kind of identify where constraints are. Me as the local utility, I look at my own local constraints. The non-wires alternatives works fine. That says, hey, I can put this battery in to avoid either a station increase for capacity or a line upgrade for capacity at the very local level. That's great. But I don't really get a slice of that transmission avoidance or the generation avoidance that should attribute to that. And I think policymakers have been trying to deal with that, by creating incentives or trying to set up policy and pricing to try and get at that nut that says, hey, that local investment has attributed benefits upstream that they should be able to cash in on and make it reasonable for them. So I kind of sort of glossed over about 5 or 6 roles there in terms of technical safeguard, advisor, technical advocate, consultant. So I think long and short of it, we have the relationship with the customers. We do a great job trying to manage that, our local utility, and making sure that our customers get the best value. But we also are the advocates of the industry and saying there's good roles that everybody's playing along the way in trying to solve this problem. It's just making sure it's coordinated.
Yeah, Ivano, I like your comment of the utility being the advocate for the consumer. I think that's really true in a lot of ways. And a common theme that I've heard each of you mention in different ways is this stacking of services that storage can provide but isn't able to provide currently in Ontario. And I think that that's going to be an exciting thing for us to kind of look at more. So this next question is kind of open to all of you can think about it, but talking about the role of utility, there's been a lot of talk of different models, like the distributed system operator model, which would allow utilities to have a greater role in managing and supporting distributed energy resources in the grid. I'm curious for all of your opinions on that model and what would actually take to make that transition work from how we are today to a DSO model. So anyone want to kind of jump in to take a stab at that?
I'll be
for it. Yeah.
I was going to jump in. I mean, the distributed model works well. I mean, I was going to say, I mean, we can't operate a transmission grid. We need a transmission operator for that, and that's what the role of the ISO is. But what I like about a DSO model is it's the common place for aggregation. It's the common place to know and really stay close to where, again, all the distributed points are, including the behaviors around it. So, you know, we never really talked about electric vehicles. You made the announcements, PG&E, GM, and Ford. I mean, they're bringing a vehicle that moves around into a play that it could be a source or a load. So the DSO model, I think, makes a lot of sense when you're looking at the technology is creating this variability, this movement, and need for matching at a very local level. And we have the local play on it. The pushback on the DSO model is every utility's got to scale up and provide that service and have the skills to do that. I know here at Oshawa, we're ready for that. We're excited about that opportunity it presents. I'm not speaking on behalf of all of them. Not every utility is going to look at that. And then the issue is it efficient and effective? And so again, if we play the role, we've got to give the service. And so again, our local utility model is, hey, if we don't provide the service, I always tell people, they know the throat to choke. It's me. They know how to get a hold of me. And so there's an element of service that comes with that. So if you get too big, people go, I have no clue who I call to get that kind of service. In our size and space, we're in the right place to be able to play like that. So I get excited about that model. I'd like to see it happen, but that's my own preference.
Can I jump in on that one?
Please.
Yeah, so I was going to say, just dovetailing off Ivano's comment, and it's an important one, you know, he as a utility is ready to go is what he's saying. I think the important part also is these DSOs would also need to operate and interconnect and work as a larger body. And that's where you've got Ivano ready to go. You may not have others that are ready to go, and maybe they're ready to go in a different way. So that whole standardization is a big piece of making sure that this type of a model works. And so I think, you know, in terms of maturity levels, I think different utilities across the province are going to have, you know, a different broad spectrum of capabilities, technologies. You know, the details are really going to be the challenges that people are going to need to sort through. You know, you even talk about technical details now. Everyone's got their own engineering standards just on regular assets. People have issues with interconnections. You add this level of complexity, there's got to be guidance and standardization on how this would be rolled out. Academically speaking, you know, these DSO models they can serve a lot of benefit, and we're seeing this actually show up in other industries, you know, like IoT and wireless networks, where they're sort of decentralizing some of the stuff. So you are seeing this proliferate, and it even included things like cryptocurrencies to clear out transactions. So you are seeing transactive markets like this build out in other industries. It can have implications to Ontario and energy in general. So just speaking academically, you know, there's a few steps we need to work out, I think, in general for anyone trying to build out DSO models around the world. But it is definitely a model that other industries are seeing growth in.
Yeah, it's certainly an exciting time. Sorry, Terry, is there something you want to add? I'm just being conscious of time. But
Yeah, only, and I mean, I think they both raise great points. I think the point I would raise is that change is coming at us, and you know, small is becoming bigger, and you know, but as you're looking at this, I think you want to do it from the context of reliability, obviously, affordability. You know, let's not forget about the customer here. But the other thing that's happening is just the change in you know, with climate change, carbon, et cetera. You know, and there is that need for more integrated energy planning that you're hearing about. So it's not something you're going to do in isolation, is the only thing I would ask for.
Yeah, it's wonderful when you can find a topic area that everyone kind of sees as a useful and beneficial next step, though of course with some cautions, Terry. So in the interest of time, I do want to make sure we get to some of the attendees' questions. Remind everyone to please check the questions list and to upvote them. Before we get to that, though, we did have another poll that we wanted to ask. Elaine, if you can help set that up. A lot of our discussion today has been on the regulatory side, the risks, the policy side, the utility role. But of course, there's a role for building owners, managers, and developers as well. So we wanted to gauge that in this next poll. Here we go. If you guys can all see it, what do you think is the most prevalent factor that will shape the future of energy storage? We'll give a couple moments here.
So while
Okay.
they're answering the poll, Matt, I'd be curious as to what your answer would be as one of the innovators in this province, a highly respected one. Where would you go?
As I look at this, to me, there's so much on the legislative and regulatory change. That's why I intentionally tried to spend a fair bit of today's conversation around that. Why I thought it was so important to have the IESO and OEB, as part of this discussion. The technology is there. Terry, you said it. The stuff that was innovative 10 years ago for pilot projects now is a matter of course. My personal opinion, it's the regulatory change to allow utilities to profit from making decisions that lower their overall costs, and allowing developers and third parties, homeowners and small businesses, the ability to participate in these energy markets through aggregation. That's what excites me the most. And the policies just don't allow it today.
And I would just say, Matt, former IESO, Harneet's the man on the person on the hot seat right now, and I'm comfortable with that.
Former IESO, of course. So yeah, it looks like some other people share the same opinion that legislative and regulatory change is really key to getting us there. So I'm going to jump in the last remaining minutes into some of the Q&A. Thank you everyone for submitting questions and upvoting them. Makes my job a lot easier. So I'll go in order of the most popular questions. Are global adjustment fees expected to remain the dominant portion of the electricity bills for Class A customers? This is a bit of a tricky one. We talked a bit about it earlier. Terry, why don't you kind of give your guesstimate of where you see that going?
So I think for some time, yes, you've got a lot of costs that are fixed. They're captured within the global adjustment, and trying to move those, we've seen some of that move to the tax base, and there's been some indication, but I think it's going to be challenging to go too far too fast. Obviously, when they get into start procuring, making new contractual arrangements, that's the opportunity, but we're still a ways away from that, I think, in terms of a significant amount.
Yeah. Ivano, anything you want to add to that? Harneet?
I would agree with Terry. I think I look at global adjustment as the gap in it's a model we've adopted here in the province of Ontario, like it or not. It's the model we've adopted that balances out what the market price for electricity is versus what you end up paying for it. And there's a recovery element to try and sort of neutralize the impact. So it's either shifted to tax base or shifted to market. At the end of the day, that's the mechanism we're using. If you don't have it, then you're going to have to do some sort of political decision. And then going back, I remember the Bill Davis days of the 70s where the province just decided they were just going to pay for it. And that's that. So it's more of a political question. It's just, the reality is it's just the gap between what we're paying and what the market's charging for electricity.
Yeah, I know I'm not on the panel and probably the least qualified person to respond to this, but I have had a number of conversations with the Ministry of Energy, and although I can't comment on where they're going, I know that in 2019 they did a stakeholder consultation on potential changes to the program, and then in 2020 they had the Comprehensive Energy Plan, which changed the allocation of costs of the global adjustment The sense that I have gotten from my conversations with them is the feedback that they got was that was the sufficient action to take. There are a few more, they've been calling them kind of like cleanup policies that are being recommended, getting rid of the impact of the AQEW. But the sense that I get is that the current government is satisfied with the changes that they've made, and they've reduced the overall cost of the global adjustment by shifting those allocation of costs to the tax base. So that's the sense that I get, is that it's safe for now. And if you think about it, the Liberal government was the one that put it in place and expanded. So should there be a change of government, it's doubtful that the Liberals would move away from the program that they implemented. My own opinion, but I'll just put that out there. Next question. Would the IESO consider permitting or enabling global adjustment hedging at a cost in the future to help underwrite storage investments? I'm not sure. Does anyone want to raise their hand for this one?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that even formally of there. I'm not sure what I would do if I was still there. I do think it just raises the point though, that just reemphasizes the challenge associated with GA and the challenges. There are winners and losers, a lot of winners and losers in GA. And and this is the problem. I think one of the big problems around storage development is what price are you paying as a load to consume the power you want to turn around and supply back.
I like the question. I'll just chime in, Matt. I like the question because it's like a financial instrument. I'm not sure who asked it, but I'm going, hey, if you see your outlook in the future being better and you want to strike a deal with the ISO who signs a counterparty hedge on that, I guess it makes sense. I like the creativity around it. I don't know that the ISO would have the skills to even take on that kind of risk. But I like the thinking from the other side.
It's an interesting thought of opening up different business models, right, to manage risk. You mentioned before that consortium approach. So again, it would be clever, but there is a fair bit of risk, not just policy and forecasting risk now, also the value of the global adjustment and future hedges against it. Okay. Any other comments on that? I can move on to the next one. Okay, all right. Terry made the point that Ontario is going too slow in the energy transition and leveraging the benefits of things like DERs and CDM. When will the initiatives and consultations mentioned provide tangible results? Is it time to turn activities into outcomes? So anyone want to comment on that one?
Sure, I can provide some feedback there, Matt. So a couple of things. I mean, there's a few consultations that are ongoing. And the FEI one that I mentioned, that's going to have tangible results coming out this summer. So June is sort of the target of when we'll have a report back into the OEB that's going to look at DR usage and integration. And so from that, there'll be breakouts in terms of any details that we need to work through. So the report itself is scheduled for the summer. The CDM guidelines, they've been out. So that's been out since 2021. In fact, when I was speaking to one of my VPs, I said, look, we've got this out there that CDM activities can also earn revenues from IESO markets. Do you have any examples of that? He goes, we haven't had anyone come through yet. So, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is we have some of the paperwork, the policies and codes already ready to go. And as we get IREs, we've been pointing folks to the right spots, but we haven't seen some of the investments themselves come through. We haven't seen some of it materialize. So I guess it's two-sided here. One is, have the paperwork, have the policies and codes ready to go, but then also have investments come through, have folks actually uptake some of that. So making sure that people are well aware of that and are engaged. That's why I wanted to make sure that the IRE is out there for you folks to make sure you're engaging with us. If you've got something that can uptake on anything that we've published, anything that we've written, reach out to us. And if there's some clarity that still is required that you don't know about or you want to try out, again, reach out to us because we want to make sure that we're pushing things forward. The pacing is an interesting one. And going just academically, we were talking earlier a little bit about sort of the risk aspect and the risk and reward around, pacing out and making the right investments. Like some of these are fairly large decisions that utilities are making. And, that risk and reward equation is an interesting one when you're looking at some of the energy transition pieces. I think a lot of utilities are still focused on pilot projects. The scalability and the scaling is what's going to sort of push the needle, right, and make real impact to the grid and the real system. And it's almost like taking penguin steps on ice, right? You don't want to fall, you don't want to slip, you want to go with a firm foot. And so everyone's taking steps, and we're watching where people are making advancements, and we want to be part of those. But as we do that, we want to make sure others are hearing about it and working through them. So there's a pacing question, certainly, that we need to keep pushing forward. And I'm always mindful as a regulator that we don't want to be in a regulatory position where market forces the pace of those. We know the business cycle has extended, like it's much sooner. Sorry, not extended. It's shortened. It's much quicker. Energy and technology is shifting what traditional utility timelines used to be. And so we need to be cognizant of that and work with industry to try and be at the same pace with them. And so part of that is learning from the pilots that they're evaluating and trying to build it back into codes and policies. But I think we need to definitely be cognizant, and I'm definitely cognizant of the timing and the pacing and the pace at which the market is looking to push some of this too.
And to be fair, a lot of this is recent, right? We're coming out of COVID. You look at the annual planning outlook of the IESOs, it jumped from 0.9 to 1.7, almost doubling in terms of where energy demand was expected to grow. We're really starting to see the impact of carbon, and the minister's letter to the IESO saying, go look at what you would do without new gas, go look at what you might be able to do without gas now. So there's a lot of stuff that's underway, and it's quickly getting underway. My point is it just needs to move faster, I think.
Yeah. And Matt, one last point I just mentioned is, as you look at like around the world and you look at different bodies, different regulatory areas, and especially areas that are unregulated, energy transition is a global phenomenon, and it's happening all over the world. And it's not just in regulated areas, but even when you look at the non-regulated or lightly regulated areas, they haven't solved the problem either. Right. So, that risk reward, going back to risk and reward, I mean, they've definitely got the right incentives to do certain things, but they haven't fully solved the problem either. I think, again, we're trying to right pace it, but also, watch the costs and watch the risk. It's a fine balance. So complex, but certainly something we have to tackle. It's our largest challenge for sure. Yep.
It's a great point. It's compared to what, certainly there are regions that are ahead, but I think we're all, glad that we're not in a situation like, I don't want to pick on anyone, but Texas that had, blackouts and spot prices of electricity that are 9,000 times the regular price because of, planning issues and regulatory issues. Mindful of time, guys, I apologize to the attendees that submitted questions that I haven't been able to get to. I just wanted to take a moment to kind of wrap up and thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Elaine, I believe, did you have one last thing that you wanted to say before we wrap up for today?
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm back. I just wanted to thank all of our panelists for this lively discussion that certainly could have gone on for way longer. And I want to express our gratitude for your time today. Peak Power has made a donation to the Energy for Opportunity, which is a Canadian charity that improves the livelihoods in rural communities through the cooperative execution of renewable energy projects. We also want to extend a thank you to all of our attendees as well. Please be on the lookout for a post-webinar survey after the webinar ends and in your email. We're going to be offering more webinars in the future, and we really appreciate your feedback. That's it for me. Hope everyone has a fantastic day. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.